I always encourage them, be brave and have the courage to say, what do I need to still improve on? Where am I at? I'm here, I'm showing up, I'm doing all the work. The team talks about depending on me, needing me. The coaches are telling me how great I'm doing, and yet there's nothing coming to fruition.
Hey team, welcome to the Kick It with Katie podcast. I'm your host, Katie Colliker, and welcome to episode 19. This is a part 2 of my interview with Tiffany Turner-Baldwin, and it's going to be picking up right where we left off regarding burnout. And if you are just listening, please make sure you go back and listen to part 1 so that you know where we are when you go into part 2. This is a great conversation today where we answer several questions about players and concerns that they have and things like that, and how Tiffany works to overcome those situations with her clients. And again, if you're interested in her services, all of her contacts that I have are in the show notes, and you can reach out to her for any inquiries about her services or questions or anything like that. If you have any questions for me regarding this interview or any past or future interviews that you have questions that you want to try and get answered from those that have been there, please email me at kickitwithkatiepod@gmail.com. Link is in the show notes, or reach out to me on Instagram, kickitwithkatiepodcast _ between all the words. Link is in the show notes as well. I have said this before, but I am doing a giveaway for the merch shirt. So please follow me on Instagram. I'm going to be releasing that so that you guys can enter to win free merch shirts and some stickers. I've got those ready and waiting to send them out to you guys. So if you are interested in that, please go and follow me there so you can know what to do to get entered for the free shirt giveaway. Please make sure to give me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Give a review, rate it, and subscribe. So if you subscribe wherever you're listening, then you will be notified when new episodes drop. So we've got a few new episodes coming out in the next, there's this episode today, and then there's another one in a couple of days that's going to be dropping as well. And then when you want to hear those new episodes that are going to be coming out, make sure that you are subscribed so that you are aware when they drop. So that is what the subscribe button is for, so that you're aware when the new episodes are dropping. So please make sure to do there, and also share the podcast. Please share anything that you feel strongly about, that you love. Please share it with somebody that you know so that we can keep this podcast growing and just keeping it on its way. I loved you guys and your feedback and the appreciation that I've seen on different posts that I've done for the different episodes, and comments that people have sent me personally, experiences that they've had and how they relate to the person that they're listening to. So that is awesome that this community is coming together and you can feel that. And I'm super excited about that. But here is part 2 of my episode with Tiffany Turner-Baldwin. Do you talk to a lot of players who are going through maybe a burnout phase in their careers where they're, just kind of done with it?
Yeah, I think the players that I talk to most about those things are that college level where they've been doing this for their whole life, and now they're looking at the decision of, do I try and go pro, which is, this even more elite, 0.5% of all kids end up playing at that level. What do they want, mm-hmm. right? How do they want to spend? They're already burnt out from the expectations of college, balancing that, study tables, trying to have a social life, looking at relationships, and yet their passion and love is for the sport, and they have people around them who have put their heart and soul into their performance, mm-hmm. right? Parents, family, expectations, friends, teammates, coaches even can kind of unintentionally put that pressure on them. And you see it every year. The stats come out of how many players have gone pro, from what schools and where they're going, and that piece of things. And so while it's meant to celebrate them with the world of social media, that can be hard. And the other thing is everybody has an opinion, even though they don't know you with social media now. And so I find a lot more of that kind of burnout of, somebody's bad mouthing somebody else, or this person's never met me and they're on social media saying how bad I played. And you're just so visible, and you can hear and read everybody's thoughts without them actually knowing you as a person or knowing what else was going on. Simone Biles at the last Olympics was a perfect example. Nobody knew what was going on but her, but everybody had an opinion of whether or not she should have competed, but she did what was best for her, which was super brave. And I think that's a big thing that I teach athletes at that level is, what do you want? Like, yes, all these people, but you didn't ask for it and you don't owe them anything. And so how do you continue to pursue what is best for you and what your life looks like, and what do you picture your life looking like, and what are your values, and how does that all come together to make the next decision? And that it's not permanent. We all have the choice to keep playing or not playing at any point in time. So there's nothing saying like you sign contracts and other stuff, but you at some point can say, I'm just done. And we've seen players do that recently. And sometimes it is about mental health because of injuries, because of the pressure, or just wanting to not have to put 120% just into your sport alone. It's a lot of traveling. It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of dedication. And sometimes we all just reach this point where it's like, I want to try something else because I've been doing this my whole life.
Yeah. And it's always very difficult for somebody who, like you said, has dedicated so much time, effort, money throughout the years, depending on where they are, that to just all of a sudden say, I'm done with it. It's really difficult, because you do feel that pressure and you feel like you're letting people down by not continuing to pursue it. And again, sometimes it is just best for somebody's mental health because, that's what you have. That's their person. That's what they're feeling. And you can't tell somebody that they're not feeling something,
Right.
Which is difficult because if that's how they're feeling, that's how they're feeling. You might not feel the same way or agree with how they're feeling, but that's just what they're feeling. And it's very difficult for people to accept that, especially when you see such an elite level player. Like, if you see an elite level player and then all of a sudden they're just like, I'm done, my heart's not in it anymore, and you feel bad for them. And it is difficult to try and help cope with those players. I know we've seen players where they feel like they come from a team and their teammates are being recruited into these other programs where it could be an MLS academy or just into college, but then these other kids who have been playing with them for just as long and being dedicated just as much are maybe not being looked at. And so how do you feel that you would help them work through that as a player who's kind of being left behind?
Yeah, so I think some of it is looking at the overall situation, right? Some of those MLS academies, for example, or college recruitment, some of it is connections, experience, having conversation with coaches about what that looks like. The other piece is that sometimes there are other things that are standing out, right? And so for players, I always encourage them, be brave and have the courage to say, what do I need to still improve on? Where am I at? I'm here, I'm showing up, I'm doing all the work. The team talks about depending on me, needing me. The coaches are telling me how great I'm doing. And yet there's nothing coming to fruition for that. And so sometimes it's about, I laugh because I always tell my son to be humble. And that's something we've worked with our kids on a lot is not to be over exert their own abilities or verbalization of their abilities, but really to have those conversations and sometimes say, I'm good enough to be doing this. Why isn't anyone paying attention? Because the people in those arenas are going to have the answers, right? Sometimes it's reaching out to a coach. If you want to go to a certain school, reach out to that coach, walk up to that coach when they're recruiting, introduce yourself, make yourself known. And I know that's not a popular opinion amongst some people, but they recruit a lot of people. They watch a lot of videos, and you're seeing a lot more coaches look at and recruit from the bench first. What does it look like? What does your attitude look like? What are you doing on and off the field? What are you doing before the game? What does your social media account look like? What are those things? Who are you as a whole person? And sometimes that is not portrayed just on the field. Sometimes it is more just because you're not out there boasting about yourself and you're not calling the attention to yourself, and you are a team player. And I think that's the most frustrating thing. And then you have to have somebody else take a step back who's not directly involved. Parents are not great at this. Teammates are not great at this because they're all invested and care about you. But having somebody else look at what's going on and show up to a practice or show up to a game and kind of give some feedback about that, because there's something there, and everybody close to you is too close to see it. And maybe even sometimes the coaches are saying, nope, you're doing everything right. But just like you would in any other area of your life, right, in medicine or academics, if you're not getting the results that you need, finding a specialist in that area to come in and look at it and say, what are you seeing? What's going on? What else can I be doing? Because sometimes it's just a small tweak, and sometimes it is that you're a consistent, amazing player who's always consistent, always does the right thing, shows up at the right time, and performs at their best. And you don't have the fluctuation of good days and bad days. And so those players can sometimes get overlooked, and that's really frustrating. And so having somebody from the outside who's not part of the organization say, okay, but are you having those conversations? Are you walking up to coaches and introducing yourself? Are you talking to your coach about what your goals are? Are you just showing up to practice and proving that you're good enough? And I think those can be really important conversations to have.
Yeah, because I know at least the coaches that I've dealt with, anytime that a player says that they want to try and get a college scholarship or whatever, that coach will try and do everything that they can to help them succeed at what the player has asked them to help them with. I mean, that's literally their job as their coach, is to try and get them to the next level. At least it should be. I mean, personally, right. I feel like, there might be coaches who try and hide players or keep them to themselves because, this is my amazing player. And it's kind of like, but your job as the coach is to put the player on the best platform for them to succeed, because that's hopefully what the player wants. And once you've done that, that's a check mark for you. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do as the coach. So hopefully the coaches out there are doing that and letting their players be seen and exposing them to those more elite environments if that's what the players want. What kind of advice would you have, or what do you work through as far as injuries for players? We've talked about it briefly. Players that have maybe a career-ending injury or an injury that takes them out for an extended period of time. And for elite athletes, for whatever sport, that's obviously a major blow to their ego. And so while they're trying to physically get better, they also need to be mentally keeping themselves aware and working through that, because it can be a huge blow to their ego. So what kinds of things do you work through with injuries for players?
Yeah, so I think it depends on if this is an injury that's going to take you out a season. You look at different things. When it's younger kids, really helping them understand, because I think at a lot of times their bodies just heal, right? For most part, you fall down, you break something or break a finger or get a bruise, like you heal. But helping the younger group of kids understand when they tear an ACL or roll an ankle or break something, that it's not just showing up and waiting for it to heal. It's supporting your teammates, being the player off the field to support them, because then they can support you too. And when you grow up in sports, that environment is so necessary to the developmental part of things. And seeing your teammates light up that you're at practice, even though you can't be out on the field, showing them that it's not just about being out there, being the star, being the player, and showing the coaches that, but then working through the understanding that they have that if they don't put the work in, if they don't do the physical therapy and all the extra stuff, that feels like they is a waste of time, or rest it instead of going and playing, backyard sports in the summertime when they're supposed to be resting, but they can't sit still any longer. Those can be injuries, that can prolong the injury. And I think that's a really hard thing. So helping them understand that piece of it, and that it will be worth the payoff, even though it's going to take a little bit longer. As you get older, it gets more complicated, because sometimes, depending on the year and the time, those injuries can prevent you from getting your goal, right? They can interrupt their recruiting season. They can interrupt college visits. They can interrupt, your professional, once you get to that level, how much you make, because there's a risk, because you're going in with this injury. And I think helping players to stop those limiting beliefs and see what other value it adds. And there's always work you can be doing when you're sitting on the sidelines, or if you're benched by an injury and you're gonna return to play. There are other things that you can focus your energy on. And I think that gets missed because there's so much focus on the injury and when you'll be back. You can work on your mental health. You can work on the other areas of your fitness. You can work on dietary stuff. Like, there's a lot of pieces to becoming a high level athlete that aren't just about showing up and playing and practicing hard. And so sometimes injuries give you the ability to focus on those and spend more time on those. When it's a career ending injury, I think it really is about helping them understand that there is more to life than this one path that they saw, which is so much harder than I just made it sound.
Right. And it definitely is. Yeah.
But those, by helping them understand the skill set they have from playing that sport for however long, and the passion, and helping them find the other paths where those passions can be used, right? So coaching is a big one that, as you get older, a lot of people go into, especially as they have injuries, even if that wasn't their intended path. But there's other places, right? Like, you can do sports social work, sports psychology, physical therapy, medicine. Like, there are so many other things that you can do to continue being included in that athletic mindset, and with those teams and with that environment. But it takes a while, it takes a lot of processing stuff, and then helping to pull out those skills that you've learned and those personality traits that have come from that, and going from there. And I think that helps people realize, like, wow, like, this is more than just a sport. Like, I'm a whole person. I'm a whole athlete. I'm a whole lot more than just the performer I was on the field, or, wherever else, in the pool, wherever else you were playing. And I think that's the piece that as I work with athletes, I try and help them see, you're a whole person. You're not just a performer. So here's all that you have to offer. You're not just a soccer player. You're not just a midfielder. You're not just a swimmer. Like, you are a whole person. And if we use that whole person mindset younger and younger, what ends up happening is those injuries become less damaging overall, because they know that they have more to offer in life than just showing up as a performer.
Yeah, and it's definitely for the athletes now, when they do reach those career-ending injuries. I've seen players that, former MLS players that were handed maybe coaching roles, but maybe they weren't experienced enough for it, but the club that they were playing for still wanted to be able to offer them something in the community. So, like that, if you do have maybe a career ending injury and you are looking to stay in the area of the sport that you were in, reach out to your coaches, your mentors, even former player teammates, parents that maybe you know that have jobs in fields that you're interested in. Reach out to them, because I know a lot of people in the soccer world. I mean, we're a huge soccer family, and so we have a lot of connections where we know physical therapists, we know doctor oh my goodness, what
Orthopedic.
orthopedic doctors, orthopedic surgeons. I know tons of physical therapists, and so it's like, even if you don't want to do maybe the coaching side, maybe there's another mental or physical health side that you want to get into if you're going to college, that kind of a thing. Or even if it's not, you want to leave it behind. I know some players who they played all through college, they got college scholarships, they got their bachelor's in whatever, and now they're in a completely different field, and soccer is just something that got them to where they are today. And maybe that's what you want to use soccer for. It's a stepping stone to where you want to get, or whatever sport you might be playing. And that's always something to think about. Think about the people that you've met along the way that maybe could be a help for you to get somewhere, if that's something that you want to do. And you go, oh, I know that person, they were a lawyer, maybe I could go job shadow them, or see what kind of line of work that they're in, that kind of a thing. So definitely take advantage of those connections and friendships, hopefully, that you've made, because more than likely people will say yes, yeah, come over and job shadow me for a week or something, if that's something that you're interested in doing, and see what they do. I mean, I don't know if that's something that people have thought about, but I mean, that's just me, just off the top of my head.
Yeah. And I met people who have done that, who have just shown up and said, hey, like, this is something I love doing. How can I help? Just as a way to even rebuild that passion that they had and reconnect, or doing it with other sports, and I think that's a big thing is that it doesn't, sometimes that's still too close to home, and it's still too emotional to go back to the same sport in that way. But it doesn't mean you can't do other things. And if you look at other sports, I mean, well, you look at the MLS and all those announcers, most of them, not, I shouldn't say all, but most of them have played previously, right? In most sports, that's the case. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that can be a part of it, but sometimes it takes the player getting out of their own head, and getting away from the focus of their injury and disappointment of not having the path that they thought they were going to be able to see those. And I think as coaches, supporters, therapists, counselors, parents, families, like, sometimes that is the best thing you can do for your athlete, is say, like, hey, look, this is not the end of the road. What else do you want to do? Like, and I think that everybody wants to support but doesn't know how, when injuries like that occur. And so sometimes saying, okay, well, what are you going to do now? Because you have a choice. You can sit here and not do anything and be upset about it, or I'm happy and here and ready to help. And sometimes it does take coaches, because they're so respected, and they do have avenues and connections that can make or break those aspirations once that focus changes.
Yeah. And I know, at least my husband, I mentioned him before, and he's coached several kids that he's seen them grow up into adulthood. He's coached them since they were 4 or 5, and now they're in their 20s, and he's kept in touch with most of them, if not all of them, in some way. And he kind of, when he feels like he sees somebody struggling, he still has that coaching, fatherly thing going on, where he reaches out to them and says, hey, come help me with a practice, or come see what we're doing, even just come watch, because he kind of feels that maybe a player is down, and he wants to try and help them in some way, because he was a part of their life for almost their whole life that they've been living so far. And so he was such an integral part of it that it is really difficult. And I was going to ask you about this. Maybe players that, played up until high school and then it's over. I know for me as a dancer, or I had the same dance teammates for years and years and years and consistently saw most of the girls until I graduated, maybe right after I graduated high school. And then it's like, boom, they're gone. I never see them again. And it's, 15, 20 years later. And it's difficult for people to process that because it's almost like, you've lost that, your friends
Yeah.
after you graduate high school, that kind of thing. So that's also sort of a traumatic thing to process. So do you deal with a lot of players who maybe are in that situation where they didn't get recruited into college or anything, and so they're at a loss basically?
I don't. I mean, I think it ends up presenting as part of a bigger thing, right? Either the not recruiting process, and that's a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a piece that gets missed of the importance of it when talking about it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about that, it's being part of a community and you lose the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for parents and adults, what I say is like, imagine having this really tight knit community where your neighbor's your best friend and everybody lives really closely, and you up and move and you don't know anybody. Like, you can still make those phone calls, you can still do that thing, but you're not part of that community, which has been your safety net. And they're the people who are there when you don't even ask them to show up. They're there for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just helping to kind of build their network of understanding around that, as well as sometimes helping the families deal with, why they didn't get recruited or why they decided not to play. Because I do think that that's a big piece, is players' reasons aren't always necessarily in their control, but sometimes they are. And so
Mm-hmm.
they have intentional conversations with coaches to that indicate that they're not really ready, and the coaches see that, but the kids aren't being fully honest about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes that can be a difficult conversation. And it's not that the kids are being deceptive or manipulative, it's that they aren't really sure if they want to continue this in a college way and down a college path, whether regardless of what level it would be. But they also don't want to give up that sense of community and sense of belonging. And when you're looking at going onto a huge college campus or in a professional career, you're the new kid, and being the new kid's hard. Doesn't matter
Yes.
how old we are, like whether
Mm-hmm.
you're a kid or an adult, it's a hard place to be. And so I think helping them realize that they've done other things that are difficult before, and when I say distress tolerance, that's what I mean, like doing things that are difficult and overcoming them and pushing through them instead of giving up. And sports, you know is largely focused around building that character in people, and ability and skill. And so helping them understand that they've done that before, you've started over before, you've been on a new team before, you've done something new before, you've had a challenge that you've overcome, and you have the skill set to overcome this as well. And so I think helping them realize the characteristics that they already have that will get them through it, even though it's really hard and feels very lonely and isolating.
One of the other things I wanted to ask was, or at least talk about, is I know that there's a lot of players who, they change teams because they don't like the current environment that they're in. Maybe they have issues with teammates or they have an issue with a coach. And so instead of dealing with the issues that they're having right then that maybe could be worked through, and maybe it's just they don't like a person, but the setting that they're in is set up for success, but maybe there's just a couple of issues that they have, and so instead of, like I said, processing and working through those issues, they jump ship. Well, guess what, you're at a new team, you're with new people, but you still have the same problems, they're just with different people. Do you help people work through that where they have maybe issues within whatever team or setting they're in for the sport that they're in, processing through maybe something that they see as a flaw so that they know how to deal with those issues? Because I know at all of levels, you're always going to have problems with whatever setting that you're in. You're not going to be 100% happy probably with everything that's going on around you. And working through those and learning how to deal with those is something that you should do versus just jumping ship and finding new problems elsewhere. Because as an elite athlete, as you move up the ranks, you're going to be having probably the same problems, if not bigger problems. And so dealing with those issues at a younger age and learning how to work through them is very important. And you've kind of talked about that with other things, learning how to deal with things at a younger age so that you can process them when you're older. So are these types of issues that you work through with players when they're having an issue with a, maybe a team setting, a player or a coach or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it it depends on. There are some times where it's just a player, and so when if that player shows up to talk to me about like what do I do, or a lot of times I'll get, because it's usually at the younger level, I'll get parents call and say, what do we do? How do we handle this? How can we help them get through this? And sometimes it is a mismatch. Like their personality, what's going on with them, doesn't fit with coaching styles. And there are a variety of different coaching styles. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of change happening, but there's still a lot of like no crying in baseball type of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
I laugh because it's just such a like iconic kind of statement of
Mm-hmm.
this isn't acceptable in sports. And so I think that mentality is shifting a lot. There are times where I've gone in and done sessions with teams for a day where you kind of break apart the team and talk to the kids and different things that different people are having and experiencing, and then come back together. And sometimes it's just about helping the individual identify what their goals are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes it's that their needs aren't being met. Sometimes it's that they aren't able to perform because of other stuff going on in their life and various factors. And other times it is just about them forgetting what their goal are and getting stuck in the moment because they don't have those skills to look bigger picture. When I played at college, I very easily could have ended up in that position where I wanted to switch or do something else, but I was able to see the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
He was building a team that was going to sustain and last and be there for a long time, which it is, and many of the players have gone on to do amazing things. But what's your role, and what do you want your role to be, and what are you exactly unhappy with? Because most of the time what players are complaining about is not the actual issue. What they're complaining about is what they're focused on, because they're frustrated with some other aspect of what's happening. And so a lot of times it's breaking that down and then addressing that and giving them skills to use to cope with whatever the actual issue is that's happening.
Yeah, learning how to deal with whatever issue it is, it's very important because at least with soccer specifically, I'm assuming with other sports, sometimes that issue, whatever it may be, you work through it right now, but then it presents itself in a very similar or the exact same way maybe a few years later, depending on what the situation is, because sometimes you might still see that same thing. And once you've worked through it once, hopefully you can remember how to process it and work through it again depending on what the situation is. And obviously those vary depending on the player, the situation that they're in. And sometimes there are coaches out there that still have that there's no crying in baseball mentality, and maybe that's just not a fit for you. I mean, every coach is not a good fit for every player, and sometimes you do need to make that switch because it doesn't meld or mesh with you. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I do hate to see players jumping from team to team to team to team because there's not stability for you to learn and grow as a player if you're switching all the time. But making sure that you understand the coach that you're signing up for and what their program is, and making sure that you talk with them about what your goals are, and making sure that the stuff that you guys both want, that you guys are both doing, hopefully they align, and that you're trying to pick the right team program for whatever sport it is that you're playing, that hopefully aligns together for you, and that you can find that good fit that fits you and what you want. I do see a lot of players, at least that I know, and you talked about this briefly, how now that there's all these MLS academies, and they're starting to hire social workers on their end to help with players. And in those academies, at least like here in Utah, you're housed in a facility and you're away from your parents a lot of the time. And so that can obviously be very difficult for players. And so, at least early on in some of the programs that we know of, players would go, they'd be there for a little while. I don't know if they'd get homesick, they didn't like the program, but then they'd come home. And do you see a lot of, I mean, I don't know if you necessarily have dealt with any players like this, but processing through that and how they can overcome that, or maybe it is just that they needed to talk to somebody, but do you talk with players who maybe they tried a collegiate program or an abroad program and then they come back and maybe feel like they failed in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it unfortunately happens a lot more than anybody would like, right? I don't think these programs expect that or want that. I mean, they think that these kids and players are ready for it. Obviously, otherwise they wouldn't recruit them, because nobody wants that for these players. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
the goal. And I hope it's never the goal of any coaches. I mean, I haven't met coaches who recruit people who aren't ready, right? I think it's
Right.
a matter of kids facing something that they haven't faced before and not realizing what the reality looks like. So they have this expectation of how amazing it's going to be, and then they get there and the reality doesn't meet their expectation. And I think the other thing that at least I have worked through with several kids is they are at the top of their game when they're recruited. They are the best in their league, on their team, whatever it looks like, and they show up and they're average or they're struggling compared to other teammates that are already been there, have already been there a little while, or have been playing longer, or older, or more experienced. And so it's a little bit jarring to go from kind of being the best of the best where you came from to all of a sudden just being another teammate. And I think that's the part that I've had a lot of players say, I wasn't prepared to not start. I've never not started.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot to grapple with. And then, you have parents who are putting the money into it, and some kids feel guilty about that. If they're not starting or they're not playing, they lose focus on what they're there to work on. And or they just aren't they don't transition well to that completely independent environment. Soccer, you're just starting to see some really young players get recruited and put into that, and I think there's things are moving in that direction. But there are other sports that they start recruiting at 10, 12, 14, and know that their path is a professional career in that sport, and they're very young. And the discussion comes up every time at the Olympics: how young is too young, and when
Mm-hmm.
skills and independence and ability to make their own decision. And I think that a lot of that falls on coaches and teammates and families to help give them independence if that's the road that your kid is looking at. Ask the tough questions. I think sometimes parents don't ask the tough questions, or kids don't ask the tough questions. What is it actually like? Because they're so honored and excited and motivated to be part of the program, that they don't
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, what does this mean? When am I going to see my family next? Can they visit? And it's
Yeah.
assumed that they'll have access, and they don't. And then it becomes a like, well, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And so helping build the courage, and bravery to ask those questions so that you can have those conversations up front.
Yeah, and I know I've talked with a few players who went and played collegiate or went to an MLS academy, and one of the things that was interesting to hear was the differences in how, when they played competitive soccer growing up and they did the travel soccer and their teams traveled a lot, was the differences in the players whose parents accompanied them on the travel tournaments versus players whose parents either sent them or it was like a player only setting, and the parents could come separate, but the team basically stays together in those player only settings. And so allowing the coaches of those elite teams to be able to, I mean, and it does keep the cost down for the parents if it's a player only setting, but being able to let your child go out into the environment that they're hopefully pursuing, whether it's college or professional, and experiencing that on their own is very important, because I know a lot of people now, like I said, they want to go with their kids on every single trip and they want to be there with their player. But when you go and send your player to college or to these academies, it kind of does them a disservice because you've been with them the whole time. Some of the players that I have seen go long ways and travel abroad are the players whose parents just sent them on everything because they couldn't afford it, or they couldn't take off work or whatever. And so those players were already ready and set for that environment because they've already done it before. They knew how to use their own debit card, or order a meal somewhere, versus having their parents do it all for them. So I think that's also another aspect, and I don't know if that's something that you discuss with any players in those settings, being able to give your player that opportunity to try it out for themselves, because maybe they don't like it or they do need to get used to that environment, so that when they are ready for that next step, they've already been prepared for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a hard balance in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It, there's a lot of scary things that happen. As myself, I have that debate all the time of saying yes to things and experiences, even though I know that like there's a risk, right, of them being
Mm-hmm.
out in the world and not being there. But I think a lot of how I talk about it is communication. And I know I
Mm-hmm.
keep that up, but I do think that's such an important skill to be able to ask those questions to the coach, trust your coach, have conversations with your coach, and your kid about like, hey, this is what it's going to be like, and I need you to be able to come home and tell me like if you were miserable or if you played well or what the struggle was, so that I can help you through that. And it's okay if you feel anxious about it. It's okay if you feel nervous about this. I had a kid who had never spent, he was in high school, and for a variety of reasons, like had never actually had a sleepover, spent the night at a relative's house, gone to go like overnight camp or whatever, and then went off to college.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like you had conditioning before school started, so like that first push of college, and he just didn't know how to adjust, and it started to affect playing time. And kind of how I got involved was the coach was like, hey, what's going on, like this is you're just continuing to become less and less yourself, like your personality is not the same. And luckily that coach was paying attention, and so the coach gave him my name, and all it was a conversation, between him and the coach and family and other things, of saying like, this is just all pretty overwhelming. Like I've never had to buy groceries for myself. I've never had to
Mm-hmm.
go out, and yes, I've gone and hung out with my friends, but it's not been the same, and for this long of a period of time. And so I think that's why the communication for me is always a big thing of what are we talking about and not talking about. Sometimes things that we're not talking about are more important than the skills that you have on the field, because again, those kids leave those programs that they worked so hard to get in, and sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with the sport. It has to do with the outside life skills that they just haven't developed yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know, even my own brother, when he went off to college, I mean, he'd done like camps or whatever, but a lot of times, when he went for soccer for stuff, my dad was usually there. And so when he went off to college and my dad was no longer there, he kind of, I don't, I want to say kind of lived it up. Like I don't know if he just felt like he had this independence and did whatever. I mean, I'm hoping to talk to him a little bit more on the podcast in the future and find out, but it could be one of those things where all of a sudden they're like, well, my parents aren't here and I have no rules, and now I can do whatever I want, and then they get in trouble, or whatever, So sometimes it could be the opposite, where they felt like they've been, chaperoned their whole entire lives, and their parents have been looking over their shoulders, and now they're free, and maybe they get into trouble. So it could be a variety of reasons that things happen. And so it's making sure, like you said, having that open communication and saying, hey, I need to experience this. I need to learn how to buy groceries for myself. I need to learn how to, go to the store and figure out what foods I need to eat, because that's another thing where kids, they go off to college and they're like, well, my parents aren't here to make me food, so now I'm just going to binge on all this crap that I never got to eat, and then they're all of a sudden unhealthy. um, so it's definitely something that if that's what you want as an elite player in whatever sport you're in, making sure that you have that communication and you're setting yourself up for success. And like you said, sometimes it's those things that are off the field, and giving those life practical lessons for becoming an adult and being on your own, so that way you can be prepared and it's not so much of a shock to you when you have to depend upon yourself for whatever it is that presents itself to you, whatever that issue is. Is there anything else, Tiffany, that you want to discuss? I mean, I feel like we could just go on and on and on about different scenarios, but is there anything specific that you wanted to talk about? Or if you just want to plug your services and let everybody know if they want to try and contact you, how they can look into getting your services, if you do online, virtual, if they're not local.
So I do virtual and local in person here in Michigan. And I think the biggest thing that I want people and kind of not only reducing the mental health stigma, but is to help athletes, families, coaches be more aware that these athletes are whole people. And so if you think they have the ability to perform at the next level, whatever that next level is, or you see them struggling and not kind of being themselves, it's not always just about physical ailments or being run down. Like, there's a lot of pressure on athletes. And so looking at what that looks like and taking into consideration the mental health aspect of it, and just the mental wellness and performance piece, and how important our brains are and our emotions are in daily life and success, and helping them to look at that, as well as nutrition and other pieces other than just kind of what's going on at practice or strength training in their physical bodies. As far as getting a hold of me, my website is T Turner Coaching, or T Turner Solutions, and you can reach out at tturnercoaching@gmail.com. If you want to reach out to me by email. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, as everyone is nowadays. My Instagram is T Turner-Baldwin.
Yeah.
And even if people just want to reach out to talk more about, mental health and things like that, or concerns, questions about players or where to get help. I mean, there's a huge network through the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports, which is aswis.org, and they actually have a provider list on there of therapists who are trained in working with athletes through their social work programs. So I highly recommend that you find somebody who's aware of the unique needs of athletes.
Awesome. And I will definitely put links in the show notes. So if you are looking for any of those links, just look in the show notes and you'll be able to contact Tiffany if you have any further questions. But thank you so much, Tiffany. This has been awesome. Even despite some of our technical difficulties that we had, it was a great conversation and I really enjoyed it. And maybe we'll have another conversation in the future, but I very much appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was great meeting you.
Yeah, you too. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of Tiffany Turner's, and hopefully you listened to both episodes about the full conversation that we had. Like I mentioned previously, this was an awfully long conversation, but it was super fun to have, and thank you so much, Tiffany, for taking the time out and being able to come on the podcast and share your insights about your profession and your own soccer experience. And I very much appreciate it, and I hope that a lot of people learn some stuff from the things that you had to say and have some good feedback, because it's amazing and we had a great conversation and I loved it, and hopefully we can have you on again in the future. Please make sure that you give a 5-star review, subscribe, share the podcast, and just all the things. And you guys are great. Thanks for kicking it with me. Have a great day. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at kickitwithkatie_podcast _ between all the words. You can reach out to me with questions at kickitwithkatiepod@gmail.com. I also have a feature with SpeakPipe where you can leave me your own voicemail message if you want to be featured on the podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.